A plaque celebrating its downfall was made by the bankers.
These represent some of the deals that Drexel did. These happen to be my clients, a small number of Drexel clients that we financed, and represented up here is close to over 4 or 5 years, close to $20 billion of financing. An example, there's the National Can deal of $365 million for Nelson Peltz. There's the different tranches of financing for Ronald Perlman of Revlon, which comes to $3 billion approximately. Most of these were all debt deals that Milken created for the 80s.
Junk bonds.
Yeah, high yield bonds. We can say junk bonds, we can say high yield.
You prefer high yield?
Doesn't matter now.
What Milken personally built was a network that in effect operated like a takeover mill. You know, identifying, teeing up, and blowing away companies. Identify them, tee them up, blow them away. Identify them, tee them up, blow them away. Milken was in control of the entire process. He was like the commanding general of the armies. Goldsmith was like one of his important weapons, but only one. You should think about Goldsmith as a transitional figure, one of the agents of the change, one of the principal agents prying the levers of power from the hands of corporate America and government and putting it into the marketplace, to the day-to-day decision-making of people in the stock market.
Goldsmith's aim was to get as much money as possible out of the corporations he took over, both for the shareholders and for himself. To do this, he systematically stripped out any excess costs. He employed a man called Al Dunlap to do this. Dunlap used a new name to describe what he did. He called it downsizing. Dunlap's nickname was Chainsaw.
I was the first executive who was really doing downsizing on a large scale and was willing to talk about what I was doing, how I was doing, and was also willing to articulate the fact that this is necessary. We were operating on sick companies, cutting out the cancers. Sometimes it could involve as much as 30-35% of the people. And of course, one must close some of the operations that should have never been open. Our people that we were concerned about were the shareholders, the people who owned the corporation, the people that owned it before we bought it, the people that were investors with us, because we felt the shareholder owns the corporation.
3 for 108, taking 5,000.
I give you a couple of thousand by 5,000.
Outside of us on a half bid, there's about 9,001.
Come on, pick up the phone.
Downsizing became one of the most important factors fueling a boom in the American stock market. Every time the raiders sacked workers and managers, their share price soared. And in turn, that pushed the bull market even higher. To the Reagan administration, it was proof their policies were working. The market was reconstructing America.
The American economy is like a racehorse that's begun to gallop out in front of the field, driving the bears back into permanent hibernation. That's our economic program for the next 4 years. We're going to turn the bull loose.
Pull it back.
The market is in control now. Management was in control. Thus, the establishment was in control, full stop. Nothing happened if they didn't want it to happen. The capital markets were over here. They were quiet, they were passive, they were nice enough, but they weren't right. Now the capital markets are in control. They're saying clearly, loudly, and often, we own these companies. You fellas will perform. And if you don't, you're out because it's our property. This was unheard of then. Absolutely unheard of. You couldn't get the capital markets to go along with anything because they were captured by the management. Amazing change.
It's getting to be a disaster. You know, I mean, people just out of work, and there's nowhere you can find work. Food stamps going out. The relief program is going down. There's no work nowhere.
You're in restitution, sir. The restitution clerk will give you your check and your receipt. Just step aside.
As the takeover boom grew, millions of workers were downsized. Whole towns were decimated when the factory that had once been their main employer was closed. Ever since the war, management consultants had argued that one of the main functions of a corporation was to create jobs. But now, overnight, a new breed of consultant appeared, who explained that these layoffs were necessary.
For 40 years, for 70 years, for 80 years, we have attempted to rationalize and make bloodless the practice of professional management. Maybe that was appropriate 70 years ago, but in today's volatile environment, it just simply will not work. It is the most frightening, scary environment that I know of. Further, it has led me, for instance, to welcome the role of such dubious characters as the corporate raiders and their hostile takeovers. Throughout the economies of the industrialized world, we are beset with a degree of ambiguity, uncertainty, and madness never before seen, and I thus wholeheartedly welcome anyone of any sort at any time in any place who will scare the wits out of the still at the sleep at the helm leaders of our larger firms.
I think up to the point in time the takeovers came in, management consultancy existed to reinforce and serve management. I think it now exists to reinforce and serve the capital markets, the capital system.
But there was a growing backlash against Goldsmith and the other raiders. It was led by politicians whose power was intimately bound up with the fortunes of the large corporations in their home states.
Senator Worth? We have been arguing, it seems to me, for almost 100 years in this country about the responsibilities that corporations have to their communities. I mean, we have tried for a long time to get corporations more responsible. We've now done it at Peachtree. We're reaching out, supporting this university, supporting cultural activities and so on. We are the ultimate of what America believes corporate responsibility is, and you lawyers from Wall Street are coming in and telling us what to do with our community and our responsibilities. Now, we're going to make it as difficult as we possibly can for you to get this to happen.
Sir James?
Well, the sort of stuff that Senator Worth believes in, which he's just talked about, which is a pastoral America with a little company and the church and the university, and the whole thing is going to stay there and be there forever, and that they don't have to compete with anybody, and that competition is awful, and totally mixing up. Wait a minute, totally mixing up, this is the fundament. The difference between doing business and doing good. Doing business is what gives you the fuel to do good. Don't mix them up. The bee doesn't make honey because he's doing good. He doesn't have soul searching, am I doing good when I make honey? And he's confusing it, and that's why this country is losing its vigor.
One of the largest owners of shares in corporate America were the pension funds. They invested billions of dollars in the stock market to provide pensions for retired workers. The funds had been deliberately created as a part of the post-war corporate utopia that took care of workers. But now the funds became important weapons in the takeovers. They were offered much greater return on their investments if they backed the raiders.
Well, the raiders, on the whole, were not viewed with a lot of friendliness, let's say. A lot of them seemed to be mostly out for themselves and would proceed in their raiding activities even if it meant damaging companies that had long histories of good employee relations or long positions of importance in their local communities or whatever. But nevertheless, for the pension fund manager, that meant that in some cases the value of stocks was increased and the pension fund benefited from that. And the people that were in charge of the pension funds had to go along with that because that was in the best interest of the beneficiaries of the fund.
Well, there was a lot of talk by major corporation executives who would say, you pension funds are selling out America. You're destroying our major corporations. You are selling out to raiders who are going to destroy us, and this is terrible. It's bad for America. That was the pressure coming from the business side, and it was a business pressure from CEOs and business organizations and so on. And the pension funds were accused of providing the grease over which this entire takeover movement slid. They were the enemy.
The quiet men who ran America's pension funds found themselves in a terrible trap. The law that had created the funds explicitly said that their duty was to get the highest returns they could, provided the investments were not too risky. But by now, Milken's junk bonds seemed to be a safe investment.